Now let's look at this story, the story of the boy and the king. And I said this is found in Sahih Muslim and the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. Rasulullah ﷺ begins by mentioning كَانَ فِي مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ مَلَكٌ, that there was once a malik, a king, obviously an oppressive king. And subhanallah, how many times have we heard of stories of oppressive kings and righteous people challenging them, which really indicates that the da'wah of Islam and the da'wah of the prophets wasn't just to the average layman, it was to the political elite. It was to the political elite at the same time. Look at the story of Musa alayhi salam. Who was his da'wah to? Was it just Bani Israel? I mean, if you look at the da'wah that Allah speaks about, what aspect of his da'wah is mainly focused? The political aspect or the social aspect? The political aspect. Ibrahim alayhi salam and his battle with Nimrud, the Prophet sallallahu and Quraysh. The stories go on. It's always a matter of leadership. So again, this is another instance. The Rasul mentioned that there was a king that came before you, and he had a sahir, he had a magician. Now when this magician, he reached an old age, he said to the king that verily I have become old and I think I'm about to pass away. So send to me a young boy so that I can teach him this magic. So we can see that this is an oppressive king, a king that is cheating his people, because why? He has a magician, a sorcerer by his side. A sorcerer by his side. So a young boy was sent to him, to this magician, and he taught him magic. And what this boy he used to do, every time he, on his journey to the magician, to see the magician, there was a monk, a rahib, a righteous man, who he would pass by. One day the young boy, who was learning sorcery and magic, he listened to the speech of this righteous man, and he was really impressed by it. And so this indicates that this monk was a man who wasn't just, kept his religion to himself. He was teaching other people. He was giving da'wah. Otherwise, how would this young boy have heard? But every time he used to go to the magician thereafter, the magician used to hit him, punish him. Why? Because he would always come late. Why was he late? He was attending the circles of this righteous man. And so he would say to him, "Ma habasak, what held you back? Why were you late?" And when he used to go back to his family also used to hit him as well. They said, "What made you late?" Because on the way back from his lessons with the magician, he would also go to the monk as well, which would delay him. So the magician used to hit him, and his family used to hit him for being late, which shows you he spent a lot of time with this righteous man. And so the young boy, obviously, he complained to the rahib, he complained to the monk, and he said, "Whenever I go to the magician, he hits me. Whenever I go to my family, they hit me as well." So the monk, he said to him, the monk, he gave him advice, and he said to him that when you are late going to the magician, say to the magician that my family held me back. And obviously, the magician can't say anything. If it's your family that's holding you back, fine, you have an excuse. And if your family hits you upon returning, then say to them that the magician kept me back. He's teaching him to lie here. Okay? He's actually teaching him to lie. Now, how do we understand this? This is a blatant lie, isn't it? It's a blatant lie. Now, firstly, this is a story that occurred prior to the revelation of the Quran. Prior to the revelation of the Quran. As we know, the laws of the previous people that came before us were very different. And that's why there is this mas'ala in usul al-fiqh, ash-shar' min qablina, the laws of previous prophets, can they apply to us? And there's difference of opinion, we're not going to discuss that. But in reality though, we know that lying, it's not something that was prohibited in just our religion. It was prohibited in all religions. So we can understand that lying was prohibited in their time. So how comes he did it? Now, you know, some people I've heard, they try to say that, well, the position of the monk is that he was in a situation of war with the king at that time. And as you know, in war, you're allowed to lie and deceive. Okay? You know, the Rasul gave some exceptions, like for example, al-harbu khida', that war is deceit, so you can lie in a situation of war. Likewise, if it's trying to resolve a matter between husband and wife, you know, you can lie to try and reconcile, etc. So they tried to say, well, he was in a situation of war and that's why he did it. But that's difficult to say because this is a very specific ruling that Rasulullah passed. It's unlikely that this rule existed in previous revelation. So what we can understand, therefore, is that he told him to lie in order to prevent a greater harm. He told him to lie in order to prevent a greater harm. And what was that greater harm? That if he was found, you know, learning this religion, then he would be killed, and he would be stopped and prevented from attending a circle of knowledge or attending a circle of essentially where he was learning his iman, his aqidah. And without this circle of knowledge, he would have nothing. He wouldn't be upon the truth. So he told him to lie, essentially to commit an evil to prevent a greater evil from occurring. So even though we find this issue of lesser of two evils exists even within previous scriptures and previous nations. In fact, it's a principle that is not just religious, but even of that of common sense. So anyhow, so this was the advice that he gave to him. And then he said one day there was a huge animal that was blocking a pathway, and it prevented people from walking through the path. So this boy, he said, "Al-yawm a'lamu." Today I will know whether the religion of the monk is more beloved to Allah or that of the magician. So it's amazing. So up until today, up until this incident, he's not 100% sure, okay, about the path he is taking. That of sorcery and magic or that of religion. But he was sincere. He really wanted to know the truth. And so he said, and look at his level of certainty and the level of trust he has in his Creator. So he took a stone and he said, "Oh Allah, if the affair of your monk, if the affair of the monk, the religion of the monk is more beloved to you than that of the magician, then kill this animal, this huge animal with this stone, so that people can pass by." And so he threw the stone and it killed the animal. It killed the animal. And so the people were allowed to pass by. And then what happened? He rushed back to the monk and he told him of what had happened. And look at the response of the monk, subhanallah. "Ay bunay, anta afdalu minni." My son, you are better than me. You are better than me. And this is a teacher saying that to his student. Subhanallah. A teacher saying that to his student. And then he said, وَإِنَّكَ سَتُبْتَلَى. And verily you will be tested. So he knows. This is a monk who is a religious man. He knows the divine laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then he says something very interesting. He said, فَإِذَا ابْتُلِيتَ فَلَا تَدُلَّ عَلَيْهِ. He said that if you are tested, meaning if people find out about your faith, don't point to me. Don't point to me. Now why would he say this? Surely, if he is a righteous man, if he is a scholar, he shouldn't be afraid of the truth. Isn't he? He shouldn't be afraid of the truth. He should say, let them come to me. I'm speaking the word of truth. And so, is it a matter that he was scared? Is it a matter that he was scared and that he didn't want to be found out and that he was weak in Iman? The answer is no. What's the proof for that? Because when eventually he was caught, he was told to go back on his faith, otherwise he would be killed. And what did he decide to do? He remained firm upon his faith. That is not the stance of a weak man. It was the stance of someone who has weak faith. So the reason why he said to this young boy, don't point to me if they find out about you, it wasn't just to protect himself, but it was in order to protect the da'wah of the truth. And that's why sometimes we have to take wise stances that sometimes we need to withhold from speaking regarding certain issues if it will lead to the harm of the da'wah. After all, the da'wah of Rasulullah ﷺ, for the first 3 years of his da'wah, it was known to be in a secret stage. There was a secretive stage to the da'wah of Rasulullah ﷺ and a public stage. Now, why were they in the secret stage? Now, people say they were because the Muslims were weak. But what does it mean the Muslims were weak? Does it mean that their iman in Allah was weak? Does it mean that iman in the akhirah was weak? No. Their capabilities were weak. And that's a big difference. And people fail to understand this. It wasn't that their iman was weak. Their iman was very, very strong. But the problem was that if they had gone openly into society, what would have happened? They would have been crushed. So sometimes you need to withhold from mentioning certain things so as to, gather together your strengths and so that you'll be able to deal with certain issues in a public manner. Sometimes it's a matter of building trust with you and the non-Muslims. They can trust you. And this is what Rasulullah always used to tap into. He used to say to them, what did he used to say to them? He used to say, if I told you of an invading army, wouldn't you believe in me? He said, yes, of course we would believe in you. What's he trying to say? You should believe in me. You should trust in me. He wouldn't go to them straight away and just, tell them the outright, the reality of everything straight away, and therefore people will laugh at him and mock at him. Develop that sense of trust. Make them aware that you are decent people. Now, if you go to, for example, here in the non-Muslim society and say to them straight away, well, if we implement Sharia, we're going to cut off your hands. We're going to, make all your women wear hijab. What sort of trust are you developing with them? We already have a problem with the situation of Muslims here in the West, where, our very existence, it's being questioned. Should we even be here in this country in the first place? Okay? So we need to develop that sense of trust and build a firmer foundation here before we can start propagating and mentioning certain things. So he said, if you are tested, then don't point to me. This boy now, after accepting faith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him many karamat, many miracles. He wasn't a prophet though, but Allah gave him, this is a mu'jiza is given to prophets, but then you have something else which is called an act of karama, which is a type of miracle which is given to the righteous. He used to be able to cure the leper, and people that were blind, and he was able to, by the will of Allah, of course, be able to cure all of these diseases. So one day what happened, this king, he had a person who would sit next to him, someone who was a member of his council, and he was blind. So he heard of this young boy who was able to cure, and so he gave him all of these gifts. He gave him all of these gifts in order to cure him. But the boy, he refused the gifts. And he says, look, I'm not here to, I'm doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not here for money or for gifts. So he said, cure me. He said, as for me, I do not cure anyone. But it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that cures. So he's teaching him da'wah. He's even though the very basis of this conversation is nothing to do with the correct aqidah, is to do with curing. But what does he do? He takes advantage of the situation to give da'wah. Just like Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was in prison, those two people, when they came to Yusuf, why did they approach Yusuf? For what reason was it? The tafsir al-ahlam. They wanted an interpretation of the dream. But Yusuf alayhi salam, he began by giving da'wah first, about oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he took advantage of the situation to give da'wah, and this is exactly what this young boy is doing. So what do we do? What do we learn from this, brothers and sisters? That we don't engage in da'wah when we're asked about religion alone. Okay? Take advantage of whatever situation you have, whether it's to do with an illness, whether it's to do with work, whether it's to do with education, whether it's to do with politics, whether it's to do with corruption in society, and link it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in da'wah. Don't be so passive in your da'wah, that only when you're asked, that's when you speak about Islam. And we can learn this from this young boy. And not only that, he said, فَإِنْ آمَنْتَ بِهِ دَعَوْتُ اللَّهَ فَشَفَاكَ. He said, if you believe in Allah, then I will make dua for Allah to cure you. And obviously, he believed in Allah, and then he made dua to Allah, and Allah cured him. And then this man, who is a part of the council of the king, he came next to him, and he said to him, the king said to him, how comes your eyesight is returned back to you? How did that happen? He said, my Lord gave me my vision back to me. So he said to him, oh, you're referring to me? You're referring to me? He goes, no. Rabbi wa rabbuka Allah. My Lord and your Lord, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَكَ رَبِّ غَيْرِي. And you have a Lord other than me? He said, yes. Rabbi wa rabbuk Allah. My Lord and your Lord who is Allah. And so, obviously the king became furiated. He became furious. And he began to torture him until he eventually told him who this young boy was. And so he searched for this boy who obviously they found him, and then he said, "Amma ana la ashfi ahad." He said, "Look, I don't cure anyone." He said to the king, "I don't cure anyone. It is rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that cures." And then he repeated the same thing. "Do you have a Lord other than me?" And he says, "Yes." And he began to punish him and torture him until he said to the boy, "Who taught you all of this? Who taught you all of this?" Now remember, what was the advice of the monk? What did he say? If someone catches you and you've been tested, do not point to me. Now this young boy, no matter how righteous he is, how high level of iman he has, he pointed to the monk and he said, "It was this monk that taught me all of this." What do we learn from this? That even the most righteous can crack under pressure. And they have a valid reason to crack under pressure as well. That if that eventually happens, that you are put under pressure and finally through a lot of pain, you maybe point to where certain Muslims are, for example, then you are not considered to be in sin unless you told them, wholeheartedly and willingly and happily, you told them the reality of the matter. You say the Muslims are over there, go and get them, for example. So he got hold of the monk and he said, "Go back on your faith, return back to your old faith." And obviously he refused, and so what happened was that the king, he got a saw and he cut him into two parts from his head down to his body. And likewise he said to the blind man, "Go back on your faith, otherwise I will kill you in the same way." And he was also killed in the same way. So this, by the way, proves that this monk, he wasn't someone who is fearful of the truth. Sorry, he wasn't someone who was fearful of saying the truth. Rather, he was very strong in his iman. And by the way, another lesson that we can learn from this is that sometimes this idea of fearing, fearing the disbelievers, fearing the kuffar, sometimes we misunderstand this. I'll give you an example. One day there was, this was in a masjid, and usually they have donations, and they collect donations after every Jumu'ah or so. And so what happened, one day some brothers, they began to collect money for a certain cause without actually seeking permission from the masjid. And so the committee, they came and the imam came and he basically said, "Look, this isn't wise for us to collect for this cause in such an open manner. Otherwise we'll get in trouble. We'll get in trouble by the police, isn't it?" So what was the response of the brothers? "Do you fear the police more than you fear Allah? This is shirk. How can you fear the police more than you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We're doing something in a noble cause, for a noble cause. How can you fear the enemy more than you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?" And so this went on, and names were being called, and unfortunately. Do we say therefore this monk was like that as well? That he is someone who feared the enemy more than he feared Allah? Of course not. There's a difference between fearing physical harm and fearing obstacles that can prevent you in your da'wah, and fearing them such that you will submit to them and you will revere them. That's the type of fear that you cannot direct towards anyone other than Allah. You fear them so much that if they were to tell you bow down to an idol, you'll bow down to an idol. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong for me not to do something because I'm fearful that I will be arrested. There's nothing wrong with that. This is not shirk. This is me just looking after the interests of not just myself, but the interests of Islam and the Muslims. Okay, so then what happened was, so the boy was, the monk was killed, the man who was in the council, the dignitary, the one who was with the king, he was also killed as well. And then the boy was now taken hold of. Now, interestingly, the king didn't give him the same ultimatum. The king didn't give the boy the same ultimatum. Meaning the ultimatum of what? Go back on your faith, otherwise I will what? Saw you in half. Which I found fascinating. His ultimatum was, that go back on your faith, otherwise we'll throw you off from the top of a mountain, or top of a hill. Now it's as if, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala diverted him from giving him the same ultimatum. Why? Allah had greater plans. Allah had greater plans. So what we can learn from this is that sometimes the kuffar, they might be doing something and harming the believers, thinking what they're doing is harming the believers, but Allah is allowing it to happen in order to make Islam have the upper hand. In order to make it, and we can see this, even for example, take for example what's happening in Guantanamo Bay. Without a shadow of a doubt, that is a pure injustice to our brothers there. But at the same time, look what has resulted from that. In terms of the Muslim community coming closer together, for Muslims all around the world. We see the case with what's happening with brother Shakir Amr and other prisoners. We have people all around the world, rallying behind his cause, and we are not even anywhere near the United States. And their corruption has been exposed. Their corruption has been exposed. Now they could have, what could they have done with these prisoners in Bagram Air Base? What could they have done? Executed them. No one from the world would have known. No one would have known. And I'm sure, and I'm very, very sure that there are Muslims in Iraq and in Afghanistan that have been killed and executed, and they have committed far, lesser crimes than what these brothers in Guantanamo have committed. Or so, apparently have committed. And so they planned, but Allah is the best of planners. This is the point. They planned, but Allah is the best of planners. So therefore, when we see these incidents and see these occurrences taking place in the world, we shouldn't fall into despair. We should realize Allah has a plan and He's the best of planners. Just like when Khabbab ibn al-Arat, he said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ala tastansir lana, mata nasr? When is the victory coming? When is it coming?" He's thinking that Allah has forsaken them. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he chastised him and he said, "People came before you." And some scholars say this refers to this very hadith. People came before you and they were literally sawn into two halves with combs made of iron, and their flesh was ripped apart from their bodies simply because they believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But rather we need to have sabr. And sabr doesn't just simply mean becoming docile and just becoming passive. That's not what having sabr means. Sabr means you restrain yourself from doing the wrong thing. That's what sabr means. But it means we need to be cool-headed and we need to be wise. We need to be proactive. Sabr doesn't mean you just stop and do nothing. No, you be cool, you take the right decisions, and you restrain yourself from doing what is wrong. So he takes him amazingly. He takes him to this cliff, and he makes a dua, and he says, "Allahumma kfinihim ma shi't bima shi't." Oh Allah, protect me from them in whichever way you wish. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He made this mountain shake, and so as a result all of them fell off from the cliff apart from the boy. The boy, he comes back calmly. He doesn't flee, doesn't go into hiding. He walks straight back into the palace of the king. Subhanallah. And he says, and the king says out of amazement, "What happened to the people? What happened to your guards?" He said, "Allah protected me from them." He didn't say they just fell off the cliff, there was an earthquake and they fell off the cliff, what could I do? He said, "Allah protected me from them." And so the boy, he submitted himself to the king now. He submitted himself to the king. He knows that Allah protected him. So he has a greater plan in store. So the king says, okay, another way I'm going to kill you. Not saw him again, but I'm going to take you to the sea. And when they've reached the middle of the sea, they're going to drown you into the sea. So what happens? They go into the sea, and then again, the boy makes the same dua, oh Allah, protect me from them, whichever way you wish. And so there was a huge wave in the sea, and the boat capsized. All of them drowned apart from this boy. And he comes back again to the king, and he says to him very clearly, إِنَّكَ لَسْتَ بِقَاتِلِي. You will not be able to kill me until you do what I command you to do. And what is that? He says. He said, you gather the people together on one place, in one place. Then you crucify me. And then you take this arrow of mine. And then you say, Bismillah Rabbil Ghulam. You take the arrow, and when you're about to release the arrow, you say, in the name of Allah, the Lord of this boy. فَإِنَّكَ إِن فَعَلْتَ ذَلِكَ قَتَلْتَنِي. If you do that, then you'll be able to kill me. So what does he do? The king summons all of the people to witness this. And what a fool he is. He doesn't realize that this is going to lead to his own demise. And he does that. He holds the arrow back and he says, Bismillah wa Rabbil Ghulam. Rabbil Ghulam. In the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy. And he shoots him in his head, his forehead. And he kills him. And just when he's about to kill him, it said that the boy, he placed his hand where the arrow was. And this is significant. We'll learn this, why this is significant later. He placed his hand on his forehead. Everyone said, Amanna bi Rabbil Ghulam. All the people, when they saw this, they were astonished because they know the story of this boy. The king couldn't kill him. They say, we believe in Allah, the Lord of this boy. And everyone around the king, they said, what have you done? Have you realized what has happened? Everyone has believed in the Lord of this boy. And so obviously the king became upset. He ordered and demanded from the people to commit kufr and to believe that he is the Lord. They obviously all refused. So he dug all of these trenches into the ground and he set them on fire. He set them on fire. And all of them refused to go back on kufr, even to the extent as that women and children would be thrown into the fire. And this was one of the instances where a child spoke in his grave. So there was a mother, she was holding her child, ready to be thrown into the fire. She was holding her child and she was ready to throw into the fire, and the child spoke and he said, Isbiri ya ummah fa inniki ala al-haq. Be patient, O mother, for indeed you are upon the truth. For indeed you are upon the truth. And this is the end of the story. And what was interesting is that this boy, he was found, his grave was found in the time of Umar ibn Khattab, radiallahu anhu. And they found his hand at his temple, at his forehead. Every time that they would try and move his hand back down, okay, and this, we're talking hundreds of years. This happened before the time of Umar ibn Khattab. Every time they tried to put his hand down to put him in a normal position, blood would come out of his forehead. And his hand would naturally return, subhanallah, to his forehead. Naturally return. It's obviously a sign of martyrdom, as we know the shaheed, his body doesn't decompose like that. And how was this the case? They said that maybe, is what happened. This also happened with the Prophet Daniel. Umar ibn Khattab in Persia also found his grave as well. And the people didn't bury him because he was a prophet and they might have some superstitious beliefs, but he ordered that the body be buried in his time. So there was two famous incidents where they came across a body that was hundreds of years old, yet it didn't decompose.